Very warm welcome to this event. Very warm welcome to everybody who has come to this event, whether you're part of John's family, a friend, a comrade, and so on and forth. It's brilliant to see so many people here. And it's usually when someone dies in the movement, we say, sometimes people rather tritely, don't more organise. And I once said that to John Molyneux, when someone had died, he said, why can't we do both? We're dialectical. And we're going to mourn, we're going to organise, but we're also going to celebrate John's revolutionary life today. But our first speaker is also family, and that's Sarah from Portsmouth, and John's daughter.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I am pleased that I can be here in person. Unfortunately, my brother's in Australia and Mary's unfortunately ill, so she's over in Dublin, which is great that we've got technology that they can join us today, which is fantastic. It was wonderful to see so many people at Dad's funeral in Dublin back in December, and to see so many people here today to celebrate Dad's life and what he achieved is also fantastic too. I'm pleased I've kind of gone first in one sense, quite nerve-wracking in another, but that's fine, because I've got no doubt that people could reminisce about Dad and his worldwide achievements for hours on end. We haven't got hours on end, we've got quite some time. But for me, obviously he was my doting dad, so emotionally doting grandfather, great-grandfather, but also he may have been that inspirational teacher or lecturer, that loving partner for Mary, and that committed comrade for a lot of you here today. And the list goes on, and hopefully we're going to hear more of that today. But as I said, we've got a limited amount of time, so I will keep it short and sweet, and some of you would have heard me spoken at Dad's funeral. So there are just a few memories that I wanted to highlight today, and hopefully some of you will empathise with those as well. So firstly is the organised chaos. If anyone knew my dad, his world, his life, and I believe it's part of an intellectual genius is to have that organised chaos. So if anyone came to our home, they would have known that the dining room, aka Dad's office, shall I say, the desk that wasn't a desk, the dining room table that wasn't necessarily a dining room table, or the bookshelves that were stacked with books, papers, social worker, papers, and really the most important stuff was his student papers that he needed to mark but kind of pushed aside. So there was piles of dissertations that he needed to force himself to read. Apologies to those students that made it. Including my own dissertation at the time. It was kind of like, hey, just cast your eye over it. Yeah. It was almost that Spanish nod to Andy, mañana, mañana, you know. But anyway, that was one thing. The second thing is the megaphone. Now that thing travelled in the car, it travelled in his bag, it travelled in the house. It travelled with us on holiday. Alternatively known as Scared Nest. That was our holiday, as I mentioned before. You know, and it was great that we were allowed to take friends on holiday with us to Scared Nest. But again, that was fine. You know, and as a child, it was often, you know, oh God, we saw your dad in town at Commercial Road selling social worker papers. Always, you know, that always happened, and I'm glad that I passed on the baton to my daughter. She felt the same and tried to dodge my dad and everyone else. And I'm sure if he was still in Portsmouth today that it would happen to my grandchildren as well. So, you know, and even now I have really good conversations with friends and they now recognise what Dad and comrades were doing in those days and are still trying to fight for as well. And I'm pleased to say, Johnny Rhodes, you're continuing with that, and fantastic rally in the Guildhall Square, and Penny and all the other Portsmouth comrades, you know, not only for the teachers, but the NHS and all the strikes that are going on. Fantastic, fantastic work. More to the family, the Lee Park Gardens, and Lauren will remember this. So Mum and Dad, every Sunday, would take the girls to Lee Park Gardens. So for those that don't know Portsmouth, it's a local farm where families can go and feed the animals and have a fun time run around in the gardens there as well. And often they would go to see Mr. Plum, the water buffalo, and it was Jess, the Shire horse, wasn't it? So Dad would, much like he did with us, put the kids on his shoulders, and so they could be as high as the water buffalo and the Shire horse and feed them and pat them and everything else. And I know that meant a lot to him because he also mentioned it in his father the bride speech. Which coincidentally, that didn't go without its hiccups in terms of my wedding. As one would assume, you'd have the date in your diary quite a long time in advance. Dad being Dad thought he could quite easily fit in a trip to India and get back in time, which he did, but inevitably he had a touch of deli belly. So his suit on that day fitted perfectly, when normally you'd see it everything and Dad being Dad. But anyway, that's fine. So lastly, but by no means leastly, my dad was that gentle giant in my eyes. Not only in terms of his stature, but also his character. So his shoulders, as I said, he would toss us on, and they would also take on the weight of the world, so we never had to. His hands and his arms would keep us safe. Those big hands, and even when he died, we had those photos with his hands. That same was pureness. His mind and his intellect spanning so many subjects and testing us. That could be art, it could be sport, it could be politics, it could be environmental history, you name it. In fact, one of my daughters said we've got our own David Attenborough as part of our family, and a look at his social media following. He's obviously doing quite well in that respect as well. And then finally his heart, so big and so caring for so many. And ultimately, Dad will always be in our hearts and minds. And today will be testament to that. So, thank you. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts and members of that.
Thank you very much. I know there are a few people in the room who will remember you when you were a very obedient teenager. Our next speaker is interesting, but I think it's what came into John's political life. John was always talking about, in 1968, being in Southampton. He tried to join a revolutionary organisation, the SLL, became the Workers' Revolutionary Party, but disagreed with Jerry Healy at the meeting. That was that. He was sent packing. But he missed the meeting with Cliff, who came to meet his fellow students. They said he was brilliant, so John joined the International Socialists and then met Cliff. And John said he was like a bolt out of the blue. Couldn't believe how inspirational Cliff was. And if you think about the last book, The Selective Writings, it's dedicated to his great friend Max, but also to Tony Cliff, who I think was utterly inspirational to John. And so we got Anna Gutstein, Cliff's daughter, to say some words to that.
Yeah, just before I start, I just want to say something on behalf of my brother, Donny Gutstein. He lives in Edinburgh, and he would have loved to have been there celebrating John's life, but he is in the middle of getting 2 ballot results out, one over pay, one over job cuts, and we're sure that John would not have approved of Don taking time out on the culture. So I'm very glad and honoured to be given the opportunity to speak on behalf of our family, so Ilana, Don, Dan and myself, about John. And my early memories of John was that he was often at our house in Allerton Road, and he had many a discussion and row with Cliff, always about the best ways to deepen revolutionary politics and build a revolutionary party in Britain. If you knew Cliff, there wasn't actually any other topic of conversation that happened in our house. And I'm sure there are people in this room who remember the joy of being argued with and shouted at in our company. John had enormous integrity. Throughout his time in the British SWP, he always argued what he thought was right, even if he was isolated politically. And I remember vividly being quite a new member to the party in the late 80s, the argument that John put forward, both in writing and through meetings, to the party, arguing that men benefit from women's oppression. And although John didn't win a majority of the organisation to that argument, it led to really important arguments at the time that both clarified our position about women's oppression, but also clarified, shall I just carry on?
It is working.
Oh, it's working again. Sorry,
It's microphone.
Okay. Also clarified our position about oppression generally. And John, being a complete Leninist and following democratic centralism, stopped arguing his position once it was clearly defeated within the party. But it was his friendship to Mum, which the family particularly want me to mention and I want to mention. This special friendship is really important to Harry, especially after Cliff died. They both shared a love of art, about which John was so knowledgeable, and he wrote about it, it was so inspiring. He did a brilliant meeting at my branch in Harrogate about a year and a half ago, entitled, Can Art Help Us Change the World? And if you wonder what the answer is, the answer is yes. They went to exhibitions together. John advised Harry about her book on Malevich, and they talked incessantly about art. And it was such a close relationship that John flew over from Ireland, whilst there were still many COVID measures in place, to speak in person, and so sweetly at Mum's funeral. And he was a giant in every respect, and it's very sad that he's no longer with us. But he's left a huge legacy, and will be remembered by all of those who want to live in a better world.
Thank you very much. That's a very moving tribute. John, before he went to Ireland, was really identified with building a revolutionary organisation. I mean, one could say you could pick an easier city to try and build Bolshevism, but he did. For decades after decades, when I moved there, he was known by everybody in the city, and any strike, any campaign, and anybody who was fighting injustice, John was a key figure in that city for all that time. And we've got Penny Fawcett from Waterford WP, and a long-standing colleague and comrade of John's to say thank you.
Thank you. So it's very good to be here. Is there an echo?
Yeah, there is.
So there are lots of things I could say, so I've just picked out a few things. So I first met John when I was 19 in 1971, and he's been part of my life ever since. He was the leader of the IS group, the International Socialist Group at Southampton University, and he built a fantastic group there. And one of the ways I think it's so fantastic is that there are a whole lot of us who joined at that time and who are still active in socialist politics even now. So myself, Dave Fish, my husband, Bobby Noyes, who's been a stalwart of Southampton IS and then SWP, Ian Ogg, who's stayed in Southampton as well. Martin Lynch, who went to Dudley, SWP, and Mike Stanton in Chile. We also have Max, and some of you will have seen Max's obituary. He sadly died in Portsmouth last autumn, and that was the last time that we saw John when he came over for Max's funeral. He and Max were the dearest of friends, and it was very, very sad when John came over to see Max, saw him in hospital, and they came over again for the funeral, which was a very emotional time, but I think in retrospect, we're really pleased that we actually saw John again, even though it was a very sad time. So, John, as a leader then, he was fantastic. He was a really charismatic speaker in the student union, and he just instilled us all with the idea of revolution, of building the party, and what you needed to do to be part of a party. And obviously he wrote a book about it later, and it was very much part of his life, but that was really his ideas in action. And I think the proof of the pudding is the fact that so many of us are still here. It was a very exciting time to be in politics. The miners' strike, we had a 3-day week. I remember fly posting completely in the dark when there were no street lights at all, and you were really wondering what the hell you were doing. But it was a fantastic, exciting time, and John was in there leading us all, and it was marvellous. later on, John moved to Portsmouth with Jill, and obviously set up the Portsmouth SWP branch. And, you know, as people have said, he worked with the branch for decades. He was brilliant. He was totally well known in Portsmouth. On the left, it's a very small left, but John was absolutely known by so many people, and he inspired so many people. And indeed, there'll be many people in this room who will have passed through Portsmouth. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people are less inspired by Portsmouth than they were by SWP Portsmouth, so they decided to move on and go and live elsewhere like you. As you mentioned, Portsmouth is not an easy place. It's a very strong Navy town and a very right-wing Labour movement in general. We have now got a Labour MP, for what that's worth. But it's not an easy place. But John never gave up, of course. The particular memory I wanted to think about, and which in some ways was perhaps a high point, was the Iraq War. So before war broke out, we had the brilliant demonstration in London, and John and others, of course, helped organise 14 coaches from Portsmouth, which, you know, really, it was pretty stunning. It was major effort. We'd never done anything remotely like that before, and John was absolutely there behind it and organising it all. And then when the invasion actually happened, we were out on the streets, and it was brilliant because we took over the streets and we took over part of the motorway, which is quite a thing to do. And you know, John was always there leading us, a fantastic speaker, as I said. So later on, John moved to Dublin, of course, which was clearly the making of him the last few years, gave him a real new lease of life. But he always stayed in touch with his old friends and with the Portsmouth branch. So whenever he was coming to Portsmouth to meet up with his family, he would always tell me in advance, and they were always able to fit him in as a speaker, and they were always some of our biggest meetings. So I remember him as an incredibly kind and thoughtful person. He respected people, he always thought of other people, whilst always having his eye on the big prize of a revolution around the world. That was the thing. When Max was in the hospital and he was dying, the palliative care nurse came along and said to him, well, you know, you're going to be moving soon to another ward. You know, just is there anything at all that you'd really like? And Max turned to him and said, a revolution. And we all felt that, and the nurse said, oh, I can see he's still got a sense of humour, which obviously John replied, oh no, he's not joking. And yes, that was always, you know, John would think on two levels. Always the bigger picture, but always thinking about other people, respectful of other people. We got on really well with my mother, even when she was well into her 90s. He'd always be asked about her, talking to her, discussing her memories of Sylvia Pankhurst and so on. He was just such a brilliant person, and he is just so much missed. Yeah.
For me, a bit nerve-wracking to go on Zoom for the next 3 contributions, and the first one we're going to try and get up is Nicola Field. People who know, and it will be connected to the question of art. And there's Nicola. Right? Okay.
Well, thanks to you. Hi everybody. I'm so sorry not to be in the actual room. I've been completely run down with UCU activity, so I know John would understand. topic from home. I'm very honoured to be asked to speak about John and art, and I've written something. So I suppose it's going back about 15 years. I didn't know John, and I was in complete distant awe of him. He wrote those brilliant teacher self-Marxism columns in Socialist Worker, and I first joined the SWP in 1990, and those columns totally educated me. And now, of course, at this point, 15 years ago, he was this extraordinary speaker and writer on Marxism and art. And he really helped me understand Michelangelo's unashamed homoeroticism and the contradictory relationship between his art practice and the early Italian financiers. John helped me understand and appreciate Rembrandt's extraordinary gender egalitarianism and Tracy Emin's sort of raw skill in expressing the sexualised teenage hell of growing up in capitalism with its horrific, normalised oppression of women and girls. Now, as he wrote in his last book, The Dialectics of Art, art both arises out of and is always conditioned by a definite historical and social context, a concrete moment in the long history of class struggle, and it represents a specific active human response to that context. And I vividly remember one of his talks silently opening with a picture of the Leeds 13 on the front page of the Telegraph, those art students who pretended to spend their art grants on a trip to Spain, and we, they're hoaxing the whole media, the establishment, and making them look absolutely ridiculous as they were so outraged, including my dad, in fact. Anyway, this picture came on, and the whole room, cheering, absolutely cheering. Now, still, I didn't know John, and at the end of one meeting at Marxism, he showed these late, unfinished sculptures of slaves, Michelangelo. I'd never seen them before. These visceral male figures, slaves, appearing to wrestle like flesh and bones out of this gleaming white marble. And as John said, appearing, I just got to put this little... This is Olive. As John said, appearing as a new age of human, wrenching himself free, not from matter as bourgeois academics would have it, but from the old ideas of feudalism, serfdom, and church rules. And I saw these sculptures and my heart was just bursting. I thought, oh God, this is so fantastic. And after the meeting, I did see John sort of shambling between ULU and Institute, and I just bravely ran up to him. Never hadn't met him before. He had papers in this huge stuffed shoulder bag, and papers sort of flying out everywhere. And I thanked him for showing me these sculptures, and I said, oh, how can I find them again? And he just sort of barely stopped, waved his hand and said, oh, anywhere on the internet. Totally easy. And I felt really stupid, but, I've learned really through John and other people in the SWP that this lack of confidence that I embodied, and it had been bred in me by class society, by sexism and family trauma, and John would never believed that he could, how can I put it? He would have told me that wasn't my fault to feel like that. And when we became friends, and I told him about this awe that I'd held him in, he was genuinely astonished, but he was also indignant. It was wrong to adulate people. For John, no one needed to feel inferior or ignorant, because he took for granted that the language of liberation and Marxist theory and the deep insight that he represented, these things are open and available to everyone, and he committed his life to making Marxism accessible to everyone. And this is so important. It's changed so many lives, including mine. I'm not ashamed of sobbing, so don't worry. I think it's a good thing. I honestly have no clear recollection of how, in 2010, I came to be helping to put on the 4th Left in Vision show. And, Left in Vision was an exhibition that John put on for several years. And he described it as art that challenges the values of a society based on exploitation and driven by profit. And I suspect it was probably through Tim Evans. I don't know if he's with you in the room. I don't think he's on Zoom. But John's great friend Tim and mine, because I'd invited Tim to perform his poetry in a show in South London, which John actually came up from Portsmouth to attend to, but sat there and didn't take any notice of the show and just was talking Marxist theory to everyone around him. Anyway, I stayed the night at John's higgledy-piggledy house, and that's kind of a kind way of putting it, and joined a group of his students and colleagues at the art department in Portsmouth University to choose from this overwhelming mass of submissions. And John was such a champion of his students' artwork. People like Roxanne, Keith, he loved, cherished, nurtured, and brought forward his artist students and allowed them to converse and to educate others. So Left in Vision really helped to restart my artist life. I showed drawings of scary scenes from my childhood and some highly personal video work and a ceramics project. And John never really commented on any of it. Come back to that later. But in 2012, he came up to Peckham and stayed with me so that he could do a meeting with the Cantwell art students who'd occupied the college during the uprising. And we put on an illustrated show in a student cafe, and after John's startling and engrossing talk, the students really flocked around him. And with John, there was no mask, there was no performance. The art world and academic world is full of posturing, but John just said what he knew needed to be said to shed the most light. That was his only aim in communicating. I'm going to finish soon, I'll get through the rest of it. I started making art in a sort of intense earnest. It was kind of like a need within me about 10 years ago, and I began sharing it and showing it. I remember that John and I disagreed about Andy Goldsworthy, by the way, who I really like. And John said that he thought they were just pretty pictures. But thanks to his own writing, The Dialectics of Art, where he addressed the kind of cutting edge of climate change concerned art, I now could feel confident to challenge him and demonstrate that Goldsworthy isn't just making pretty pictures, he's making a unified commentary on metabolic rift, and I would really love to discuss that with John. And I think he might agree with me. So what I took, so this is from John, what John says about John Berger, but I think this is so important because so many comrades disagree with John about art and they don't like the work he likes, and they think he should like this and he doesn't. But the thing,
you to sum up, please.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Okay, I'll finish with this quote that John talks about John Berger. He says, what I took from him especially was that it was his conviction that it was possible to respond humanly and directly to the experience of a work of art. Many academics reject this or are not interested in it, being only concerned with documentary research. But I believe that if a direct response is ruled out, art loses its human value, and I think that's a wonderful thing to end on. Thank you. Sorry for going on.
Memet from Ireland was due to book his tickets to fly in. John's great friend in Dublin, and I really met John's great friend.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me okay, and I'm going to keep my voice as strong as possible. I'm very sorry and really disappointed that I can't be with you today. As you said, I have COVID, and I'm really annoyed about the whole thing. I was really looking forward to see comrades and be there with you. And thank you all, comrades, again, for organizing this event, not only to remember our comrade and friend John, but also to celebrate his life and his very important contributions to our struggle around the globe. Indeed, I believe celebrating John and his life is also celebrating our political tradition and a future that we all fight for. I met John when he moved to Ireland. He was my best friend. Me and John were our family friends, great friends. He was a wonderful comrade, but most importantly, he was a very important influence in my life. As time goes on, I feel more strongly the void he left behind, something that I have to learn to live with. But John has left us so much to look forward to, so much to still learn to, and so much to fight for, and that's John's legacy. The recent National Anti-Far-Right, Anti-Racist Rally on Ireland for All in Dublin was a huge success and an important moment in our fight against the rising far-right in the Republic. The mainstream media and TV reported that 50,000 in attendance. It was indeed massive, and it gave us more confidence and more energy for our ongoing struggle on that front. But it wasn't just a magical moment of pure luck. On a cold and miserable December night in Dublin, United Against Racism had called for the first city centre-based rally to counter a racist mobilisation. The far-right groups had announced a march to the city centre on December the 8th. Up until then, they were organising in various local areas and had not marched to the city centre yet. That was a shift on their behalf. We needed to change and get organised fast. But there were justified anxieties and concerns among many people, including among some of the leading activists. Confronting the increasingly confident far-right was challenging. We knew we may not have huge numbers, but we needed to build a strong counter-mobilization on that day. A man stepped into the discussions. He was never outside of them, but he forcefully stepped into discussions. He not only argued politically on why we must mobilize, but also spoke about ways to mobilize. He brought a sense of reality, context, and a sense of urgency to the discussions. But most importantly, he brought political confidence to the table. We mobilized with a few hundred people from United Against Racism, comrades and people before profit and SWN and others, and the far-right decided not to march as far as city centre on that night. They were outnumbered, even though we were huge in numbers. We left with increased confidence, and we further confronted the far-right in growing numbers in January and February, early February. There were many discussions on whether to confront the far-right or not. Counter-mobilizations wasn't an easy argument to win among some of the anti-racist groups and organizations, and we needed to win it. That man above was John Molyneux on that fateful and important night on December the 8th. We chanted together, we held our banners and placards, and that was the last time I saw John. What a way to depart from your friend, from your best friend, from your comrade. What an honor for me to have protested together on that cold night with John, our last few hours together. Fast forward, many people, organizations got together and we worked day and night, and the February 18th rally was a massive success. One that won the arguments for united fronts and future mobilizations against the far right. I'm forever thankful to all those people who worked so hard, but I still think the seeds of this success were planted on that day, on December the 8th, and John was one of the people who actually planted those seeds. So February 18th was also his making. maybe his last act alive, but certainly not his last lessons and his last teachings for us for continue to struggle, continue to fight, and many more victories to come. Thank you all again for organizing today.
Occasionally we would go down to the west of Wales, go to Swansea branch, and I remember Mary Smith, because she was the only person in the room, so she stood out. I remember John Flay, I don't know if John is here. I also remember a guy called Charlie, but I don't know what happened to him. Charlie came over the Swansea branch, and so it's so lovely to see Mary. I know Mary's gutted that she can't be here, but Mary was, I know, an inspiration to John. Not just on a political level, I know that he thought that she was utter dynamite, and he used to say to me, Mary wouldn't put up with that. So I'll give you Mary, lovely to see you.
And that's what I want to start off by saying, is thank you to people who are here and people who, both in the room, maybe on Zoom and elsewhere. Just thank you for, at around the time of John's death, the amazing levels of support, the messages, the texts, the emails, the flowers, all the stuff that came in that was just so sustaining and so wonderful. And I'm sorry, there were many of you I couldn't get back to. You sent cards, messages without return addresses, but thank you, thank you. The other thing I want to say is thank you to Hugh in particular for organising today. John had the same sort of regard for Hugh as Hugh evidently does for John. And without Hugh, without Sal, John has often said that he probably wouldn't have been here for as long as he was. So thank you, Hugh, for keeping him around for us. Well, not the main thing, but also just to say, I'm really happy then. I was so looking forward to getting hugs from people that I know have travelled from far, that I haven't seen in a long time, and that I planned to see here, and it's just bad luck. Another comrade, Barney, also struck by another virus. Myself, Marnie and Nemet were all meant to travel together and couldn't, so another time I hope. Excuse me. I just want to talk a little bit about John in Dublin, not so much before. He arrived in 2010, just retired from work, and we were delighted. We'd gotten one of the Marxist giants from the '68 generation imported. What was he going to do? And I was a bit disconcerted when he told me he was going to write about Tolkien. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't The Hobbit. But write about Tolkien he did. I think it was a kind of he was taking a holiday, in the way John would, by writing, taking a holiday from a lifetime of work. And then he got stuck in politically, and boy did he get stuck in. His writing is prolific. I'm speaking to you here from the study, which used to be called the Parlour, when these were council houses years ago. This was John's study. We used to share it, but I got muscled out in favour of the books. And I just want to show you some of them. They're all around here, and they're all around behind me, and they're all over this side as well. And they're outside this room, and they're up the stairs, and they're everywhere. And there's actually 2 shelves over there that John himself wrote, and some of them translated into languages, most of the European languages certainly, but also things like Arabic, Japanese, Korean, some of the Indian languages. Extraordinary output. And of course, all the his beloved IMR, the Irish Marxist Review, which he edited all this time, and as well as loads, as we well know, loads of articles in books and in other people's books and other people's magazines and reviews, etc., etc. And as people have remarked before, and at the funeral, so eloquently put by so many of John's comrades, both in England and from around the world, John's writing was amazing. His ability to make complicated ideas simple. Not so much the ideas were simple, but that he could put them in a way that helped us understand them. And that ability was recognised by so many. The history of his writings in the Socialist Worker back when, and all the other stuff that I just mentioned that he contributed. But one thing that I think too was a feature of John's writing was the beauty of it. John, he was able to construct the sentence with an elegance, with a simplicity, exactly the right word, the perfect phrase or metaphor, and in doing that, he made the writing so beautiful that it was enjoyable, it was pleasurable, and it was a joy to be educated by him in the way that we were. And we owe a huge debt for that. And the gas thing about it is, in this room and at this desk where I'm sitting, I saw a lot of it being produced. And he produced it with this finger. He typed with one finger. Bang, 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 bang. That was John hitting the keyboard with the force that would have been necessary to get a rusty typewriter to move. But John used a computer, of course. So there was none of the letters and most used keys left on his computer keyboard. So heavily did he tackle the whole thing. But that's what he produced. It was wonderful to read, as we know. Sorry. John operated at so many levels in our organisation. John operated at a leadership level, at local level, and he did both with a gusto and enthusiasm and a talent that was extraordinary. He, even at our local stall here, and he reminded me of Duncan Hallison, but he was very serious about it. He always took his stall seriously and the conversations that he had at that stall very seriously. And he was able to speak to working class people in a way that moved them, and it wasn't easy as a Brit. It isn't easy for any Brits in Dublin, in working class Dublin, even still, 800 years, etc., etc. But he spoke to people, and he treated them with respect and kindness, didn't patronise them, and won people. And he stopped being a Brit and was just the big man, big effect on it, and how right they were. And he related to the comrades, as we know, in the same way. In fact, what he did with the comrades was extraordinary, because he made it possible for us to do things that we never thought we could. He you know, we'd say, oh, I couldn't possibly write, I couldn't possibly address a big crowd, or make that speech, or take the megaphone, or give a lead. And he would actually explain to you why not only could you, but that you should, and this is the way you can, and this is the way you should. And we did it, because he imbued us with a confidence to do it. And so he grew us, and we missed him daily. Every day, and I'm sure many of you are like it, but it's more so for us here. When you wanted to know something, he was like your own political Google. If you wanted to know what to do next, how to strategize, what tactic to apply, John was fantastic. He was just there for you all the time. And as I say, we miss him daily. Just lastly, what I want to say about John is that the crucial role he played in the SWP and in people before profit, as I said, at all levels, from leadership then. It's a great understatement, actually, to say he played a crucial role. But John actually practiced what was called the art of politics. Lenin talked about how that theory is grey, but green is the tree of life. And John applied that to his theory and his practice on a daily basis. And if you want to see how, read his article, What is People Before Profit? It's in an issue of the Irish Marxist Review last year, and it's also reproduced in his collected writings that Hugh edited. It's an amazing piece. There isn't time to explain here, but what John always sought to do was to develop a strategy that allowed us to intervene in the struggle and how to take it forward. How to relate to electoralism, climate movement, the rise of the right. He reached beyond us, of course, both nationally and locally, and out internationally as well. He was always on the phone to comrades, all over the world. He helped launch founded the Global Eco-Socialist Network, as many of you will know. And as Memet just referred to, that demo of what the press referred to as 50,000 strong, the anti-racist, pro-refugee demo in Dublin, that was seeded way back in arguments that were being made by John at leadership level before. I just finished because I'm sorry to go on for so long. I didn't think it would take this long. Just that we acknowledge that our loss is profound, and it's why our grief is profound. But his legacy is there to sustain us and to guide us and to inspire us. It's there in his writing, it's there in our individual and collective memories of him. He's in our hearts, and and as with the rest of our heroes, he lives in the struggle, and the struggle goes on.
Not the tumour, but the Doyle, would have a real go, never flinch, was brilliant on telly, and if you've ever went to Ireland, you'd see our comrades on telly, which is quite unusual for us at this side, but also always had the focus on the real movement of ordinary people, and using that platform in the Parliament to build resistance and unprincipled opposition to the system. So I'm going to ask Brid to come in and more welcome you.
Very much you. In fact, the day after John's funeral in Dublin, I was just telling Alex, myself and Mary hit the deck. We were both exhausted, and we spent Christmas minding each other. She got some kind of a flu, and I got this respiratory virus which was doing the rounds, and it hasn't quite left me yet, at least the after effects of it. So if my voice goes, I'll struggle on doing that. I won't talk too long. But I really would love to be beside Mary now and wrap my arms around her, because she's been through hell and back again, and it's very unfortunate this happened to her today. She was very, very much looking forward to seeing you all, and to thank you, but also to catch up, and in particular I think Pat Stack and Andy Durkin, who've very fond friends of John, that she wanted to make a special fuss of you two, I think. I don't know what you would have done, but she wanted well, what can you say, I mean, that isn't already been said, and I'm sure Alex will have a huge more to say. But just to refer back to that demonstration a couple of weeks ago, 50,000 against the fascists and the racists, I don't know how many people came up to me that day and said, isn't it such a tragedy John's not here? He would have loved it. And I don't mean people in either People Before Profit or SWN. I mean ordinary Joe Subs around the movement. People from Iran, people from Somalia, from Saudi Arabia. Every country that had a struggle since, in the last 12 years since John came to Dublin, he found the diaspora and he wrapped his arms around them and he wrote about them and he involved them in our movement. Whether they were from Sudan, Somalia, Iran, Iraq, you know, he was just amazing. And I always kind of was in awe of him. Like, he was a blow-in, but he could find any of these people in Dublin, you know, whether they're in O'Connell Street or Parnell Square or down by the Green or outside an embassy, he always rooted them out. And he always showed solidarity and wrote about them and included them in. And an awful lot of them were very aware of his passing and the tragedy and the loss it was that he wasn't there to see. What was really an amazing moment in our recent political history in Ireland, and we're going to have to keep this up because there's a nasty bunch, like everywhere. I watch British TV as well, and like everywhere, these nasty people and events are creeping us up. But I do think it's indicative of the very polarised world we're living in, and I'm so glad that we have a revolutionary organisation that can respond to that. Because 50,000 people would not have been on the streets of Dublin were it not for the arguments of revolutionaries and Marxists like John. It wouldn't have happened because the method of creating a united front that pulls together football clubs, political parties, church groups, community groups, traveller groups, whatever you're having yourself, that pulls them together in a united front and at the same time wins the argument this cannot include Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, we have to keep them out of the platform and out of the march because of the importance of being anti-government and at the same time pro-refugee. So that's just that political point, but I also want to say, Mary touched on it and others probably will as well, I think Memet did. John also was very involved in, or was the key man, the key revolutionary for putting together the Global Eco-Socialist Network, and it's played a huge role in pulling. Anyway, look, the point I'm making is that John, as well as other things that were mentioned, was determined to put climate change up front and centre into our politics. And I remember one day, he always went to the XO meetings, Extinction Rebellion, and they were difficult people to work with. They've improved, but they're very difficult. They were always doing hocus pocus and yoga and all at the start. I can't imagine how John did yoga and hocus pocus. But he managed to be very fraternal with them, and then we got some actions going together, like one we did locally on the question of air quality. Our area has one of the poorest air quality measurements in the whole of Dublin, and we all lay down the street playing dead, except John, because we got back up again. We didn't ask him to lie down, and he made great fun out of that. But he did make very good camaraderie with all of the climate movement people and groups, and that has hugely helped us. I'm the climate spokesperson in Dáil Éireann, and we've really been fighting to put forward bills to get rid of fossil fuels and all the rest of it. And the amount of support we get behind us, genuine climate and environmental movement, people coming along and supporting us, a lot of it was because of the way John reached out and encompassed them and brought them into fighting together with us. The very last thing I want to say is that, yeah, a big boy politically, absolutely. Every time you go to do something, I'm still at it. Geez, I love that, John, but I wonder what he thinks of that. How would I say it? They're going to ask me this on the telly, what am I going to say? Or this is coming up on the radio. He was my advisor in terms of quick, snappy, clear arguments to put when you have very limited time. He was absolutely brilliant and essential. And I think we've learned methods from him, but we still really miss him as a friend, as a brother-in-law, as a comrade mostly. And I just want to thank you all for organising today, you and the rest. It's very important to us, and it'd be, you know, important to John's family. They're lovely people, and yeah, thanks a million for having us over, and so glad to be here.
John,
to say how much love and solidarity there is in this room. Like you, I first met Mary when I went to speak in Swansea in the early 1980s, and Mary is an absolutely magnificent comrade. I really only want to say two things, but you know, it's possible I may take a little... Oh, sorry, I should just say, the one thing I disagree with Mary about is that there's absolutely nothing wrong or peculiar about typing with one finger. I mean, why John is picked out for that is just very unfair. Perfectly reasonable thing to do. But the two things of substance I want to say are, first of all, that John bust a very boring bourgeois cliché. There's a bourgeois cliché that either you're a free thinker and an independent spirit, or you're an organisation person. It's either or. You can be creative intellectually and artistically, or you can be involved in organisation and party building, selling socialist work. You can't be both. John proved that wrong. He was an independent, critical thinker. No one, I think, has mentioned one of his books, Leo Trotsky's Theory of Evolution, where he's extremely critical of Trotsky. He says, accuses him of Second International Mechanical Materialism. That caused a big row inside the SWP. I don't know whether John was in the minority or the majority in that case, but people like me argued with him very ferociously about it. He was completely unmoved by the criticism, although you told me that he did change his mind later on and decided, after he read Trotsky's philosophical notebooks, that his criticisms of Trotsky weren't accurate, which is another thing about being an independent critical thinker. Never be afraid to change your mind. John was like that, just as Tony Cliff, his great interlocutor, was. And he contributed in a very original way to Marxism. I mean, it's really great to hear Nicola talk about John's both writing and, if you like, his kind of moral and political leadership to do with the Marxist approach to art. And what he wrote there, the theory of art as unalienated labour, his analyses of individual artists. I really hope that Red Words can republish his magnificent book on Rembrandt, which is really a wonderful thing. Were really important creative contributions to Marxism. But John combined that, as we've heard from Sarah, with being an absolutely committed, dedicated, obsessive builder of a revolutionary organisation. First, IS and the SWP, then the Socialist Workers Network and People for Profit in Ireland. I'll never forget going with Tony Cliff to speak at Portsmouth, to the Portsmouth branch's public meeting at the time of the 1997 general election. John had just come out of a very major heart surgery. He was unrecognisable. He was a wraith. He was so thin and so frail. But there he was in the meeting, directing everything that was going on down to the smallest detail. There was nothing that would stop John putting in that time, that work in building the branch in Portsmouth as he continued with the SWN. And then in Ireland, he became part of the leadership of the SWN on the political committee, I think, till his last year. And for me, having argued with John so much when he was criticising the Central Committee and so on, part of his independent thought, it was always very amusing to see him as a poacher turned gamekeeper, although I'm sure his political style of leadership was still very distinctive and open in the way in which we've heard. So John managed to be an independent, critical thinker, constantly pushing the boundaries of Marxism and explaining Marxism, expounding Marxism very well, and someone absolutely committed to building revolutionary organisation. The other thing I want to say about John, and I should say I'm in debt to Ian Rappel, another friend and comrades of John's. They particularly discussed about the Marxist critique of capitalism's destruction of nature. Ian, an email I had from Ian this morning put me in mind of this. John was a very good person to be in a crisis with. Now, one of the things I've learned is that you can't predict how good people are going to be in a crisis. There are people who seem like very tough, firm, steel-hard Bolsheviks, insistent on discipline and democratic centralism, who crack very quickly under pressure when a real crisis confronts them. And in particular, they have to make up their mind about very, very difficult questions. John, now you wouldn't think that John, whereas if think of all we've heard about John the Gentle Giant, this great, warm-hearted, friendly, open person, what would he be like in a crisis? He was fantastic in crises. I mean, I particularly remember the long and very difficult and traumatic period when the SWP went into crisis between 2007 and culminating in all sorts of ways in 2013. John, who had been a fairly consistent gadfly, as we've heard, conducting all sorts of arguments and disagreements with the leadership from the standpoint of being absolutely committed to the organisation, sprang to the defence of the SWP and fought alongside us, not unthinkingly, either at the time or afterwards in retrospect, but there he was. And he was a very good person to have on your side. He had this in-depth authority and knowledge that came from his understanding of Marxism. He also had, it should be said, a razor-sharp brain. All that chess and poker playing, wasn't for nothing. It was a way of exercising this very powerful, very quick brain. And at the same time, he had enormous reserves of strength. He could stand up to any amount of buffeting and pressure, which is a rare quality, and I think reflected not just his own personality, but the love and support that he got from his family, that he got from Mary, that he got from all his comrades. So he was a great person to have on your side. Now, I've talked about internal crises, but they're not the most interesting things. I mean, in the last year, or around this time, particularly around this time last year, we had to face the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. And we had, as John and me, as members of the coordination of the International Socialist Tendency, had to work together with lots of other comrades. It wasn't just the two of us by any means. We had to work out how, as a tendency, we were going to respond politically to this tremendously threatening and not simply actually destructive, but potentially much more destructive inter-imperialist conflict. And John was a terrific tower of strength when it came both to working out what we should be saying, but also working out how to apply it. So he was a tremendously good person to be with in a crisis. But of course, that ability to work together wasn't primarily something personal, despite all John's enormous personal strengths. It reflected the kind of bond that exists between the Socialist Workers' Network in Ireland and the SWP in Britain. So, since John died, very sadly, but very effectively, the Irish comrades either on or who joined the coordination have been working together with the SWP in Britain and the other organisations in the IS tendency to address how we should continue our response and our anti-imperialist stance in the Ukraine war. But very importantly, as we've also heard, it's involved working out how we respond to the kind of racist offensive directed particularly at refugees that are being mounted by our rulers to protect themselves from the immense crisis that they preside over, that they mounted recently. And I just want to say, I just want to underline quite how proud John would have been at the demonstration, that great anti-racist demonstration in Dublin on the 18th of February. How proud he would have been to see how effectively his comrades have begun to build a movement that can stand up to and force back the offensive of the far right. And it's very much on my mind because we've got here in Britain ahead of us our 18th, not of February, but of March, our anti-racist demonstrations to respond to the particularly vile racist offensive that is being mounted by the likes of Braven. So once again, here we are fighting the same battles on the same side in different countries. Not I talk about Ireland and Britain because those are the countries that John worked in, but it's true in many other countries as well. And it's that ability to do that on the basis of a clear set of Marxist politics that is the legacy that John made such a great contribution to building and that we now have to continue.